instilling this level of engagement or empowerment into their team to come up with the work and the idea because it's theirs. And so I think if that's the case, the team is more willing to be able to accomplish what they need to because they came up with the plan.
So thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Grace.
Yeah. So I have to say you are like so impressive to, like starting such a successful business. You started selling kombucha in a farmer's market with your co-founders to eventually now it's like valued at maybe like more than $500 million. So to start off the show, can you tell us more about how you grew up and how you kind of got into where you are today?
Yeah, so the category is about $1 billion, but I never, growing up, I never heard or knew what kombucha was. And so growing up Asian in Los Angeles, I have very deep roots within my cultural upbringing as a Chinese American. But growing up, I very much wanted to fit in into American society, very homogenous community that I grew up in. And so for me, I felt like I was always sitting between two worlds, the Chinese American side of me and then the, American side of me just really wanting to fit in. And I found myself rejecting my Chinese roots. It wasn't until my early 20s where I really started to understand who I was, what my identity was comprised of. And I feel like that made me stronger and made me able to really give me the strength to even start a business. But before I started HealthAde, I was working in pharmaceuticals. After my graduate degree, I have a background in biochemistry. And I was feeling that, that working in a pharmaceutical company, I wasn't fulfilling myself. And so ultimately, I went to business school and then ended up quitting my job because it was during business school that me and my co-founders had really came up with the idea to start HealthAde. And I would say that in starting HealthAde, thinking about all the insecurities I felt as a young girl growing up, really insecure about who I was, it all kind of came off of me as I was starting a business, because starting a business is probably one of the most uncomfortable things you can do. And even though, you have to really just put yourself out there and really kind of hustle. And so I would say that my upbringing made me stronger in a way and made me help inform me to start HealthAde.
Yeah, totally. I think that's super cool. I like that you were talking about like how you kind of grew up, what environment you're surrounding yourself with, and then, what is a culture, I guess like a mini culture differences between, like Chinese American or like the American society in general. I think it's super cool to hear. When you started HealthAde, like you started with some of your friends, like some of your really close friends, right? So how did the friendship sort of like shape up your business today?
Yeah, so when we started an entrepreneur club. So before that, we were just friends hanging out in LA. But at this entrepreneur club, we got to enjoy a great dinner, great conversation, and brainstorming different businesses. And it was through that entrepreneur club that we founded HealthAde. And I would say that, above HealthAde, we treasured our relationships in that, my co-founders are married and I'm best friends with them. And so we really valued our personal relationships above and beyond the business. And so I would say that we treasured what we had and we always kept that a priority. And so growing HealthAde, it made it really, I would say, challenge different sides of us in terms of communication, how we work with each other. But at the end of the day, we always said, what's the best thing for HealthAde? Let's make that decision. And because we really had no ego about it, we all very much came together to know that we're doing the right thing for the business. And if there was anything personal or anything got heated, we always were able to come back later to each other and talk about where things went off the tracks and how to make things better for the future.
Yeah, totally. So like in terms of putting together this group of people, so I know that you came from like a I guess like healthcare and then sales background, and then what about your co-founders? Like like you can be great friends with many people, but like how do you figure out, this is the person that I actually want to start a business with, and how that's the friendship shaped like the sort of like the business situation too.
Yeah, so I would say first from like a character level, we all were trying to do the right thing. And then from I guess what our strengths are, we really do complement each other in that way. So, Justin is very much a realist, and he's very much able to see things in the current state that it is. I would say that me and Dinah are very much optimists and have very much thought about the what if, and thought, we're like balloons rising in the sky. We're always trying to like think about the next thing. And so in that way, we've always complemented each other. And I would say that my background is in science, healthcare, and then sales from pharmaceuticals. My partner, Dinah, she's also came from pharmaceuticals as well. She has a nutrition background. And Justin, he's a musician, actually. And he was working for an entrepreneur also. And he was really able to kind of witness the life of an entrepreneur. And between the three of us, we didn't really have the typical skills, if you will, of business, but we were able to really think smart, think on our feet, pivot, and really grow through just hustling and grit.
Yeah, like curious about, you mentioned in some interviews about the early days of how you guys kind of created HealthAde Kombucha. You kind of like made the kombucha yourself. At the beginning, it was like a hair mask. Like curious about, what was the initial ideas? Like how did you end up doing kombucha? You think this is like gonna, make you guys most successful compared to, hair products or anything else?
Well, so in this entrepreneur club, we were trying to brainstorm different ideas, not to just create anything, but to help solve something that was a pain in society. And so for us, that was hair loss. And so we were brewing kombucha, not to drink, but we were utilizing the kombucha SCOBY that you use to ferment kombucha as the hair mask. So we were experimenting on Justin. We're trying to create this hair loss mask. At the end of the day, we realized that it wasn't our core competency, that is to create this clinical product, but we had really good kombucha. So at that point, we decided to sell it at the farmer's market, and that's what we did.
Yeah. So speaking of picking the right company, you mentioned that, entrepreneurs should know themselves and before they start something. Curious about what was your realization at that point? What do you see was like what you're good at or what your team are good at? And then, how does like kombucha fit into the picture?
So I would say for me personally, I knew that I wasn't fulfilled at the job that I was doing. And I knew there was way more out there for me than that 9 to 5 that I had at that time. And so I think first and foremost, like if you really have kind of that bug, kind of that feeling within yourself to do something else and something different, you should understand how, why, like where you want to take it. So for me, I've always had that feeling. And then as soon as I quit my job, I remember thinking that, the reason why I felt so comfortable doing that was because my competency around just being a human who can find a job, I felt very confident in that. So, I didn't want to have any regrets. I tend to live my life in that way. So I know myself where I don't want to live with regrets. I need to follow that feeling within my gut, that little voice in my head that says, try something else. And then, the third thing is really trying to, know what my strengths are and knowing, what I could do. And, that really helped get me in starting an entrepreneur club with my friends, starting HealthAde, and, the rest is history.
Yeah, totally. So like you mentioned that when you first started, you were trying to also seeking help from like other mentors, like you joined like the ABA or Asian Women Entrepreneur Association, I guess. I mean, I don't know the full name, but curious about, who do you see as personal board of advisor? Who do you kind of like pick brains from that?
Yeah. So in the beginning of HealthAde, It wasn't at that time that I really sought out a lot of Asian American entrepreneurship. It was the first, I would say, 4 or 5 years was really how do we just build the company.
Yeah.
And at that time, I was talking to a lot of other entrepreneurs who have built food and beverage companies to understand how they did it, how, what resources they used, how they built a team. So in that way, I talked to all the companies that were bigger than us at the time, and thinking, how do we get to that size? And so I would say that time period is, I went to those type of people. Around 4 or 5 years in, I was starting to, that feeling that I had around popping my head up, trying to find other people in the industry, other Asian American entrepreneurs, was really started because in the years of starting HealthAde, I never saw anyone like me. So it was very few people who was an Asian American entrepreneur, Asian American female founder. And so I started feeling really lonely in the conversations, I suppose. And so I wanted to understand if there were other people out there that were sharing the same feelings as I. And so that's when I sought out the ABA. I started working with Gold House. And so in that way, I became exposed to other Asian Americans doing really cool things and building really awesome businesses. And it gave me a sounding board to talk to people who looked like me, maybe feeling the same sentiment as me. So that was really helpful to, I think, my development as a leader.
Absolutely. It's so great to hear. I feel like you're actively like trying to improve yourself or find the belonging in the both like business community and like the culture side of things. Curious about, you mentioned that you talk to a lot of people that are quote unquote bigger than like your company at that time. How do you initiate the conversation and how do you kind of like get them to help you, I guess?
Yeah. So I guess first is not being afraid to initiate contact. So I remember there were a couple founders and CEOs that I reached out to, just saying hello, and I'm starting a company and I wanted to pick your brain. So can we talk? Because I really admired what they did. And so I would say not being afraid to just send an email. What's the harm in that? And then I would say, our investors really helped introduce different people to us as we wanted to understand different parts about the industry. So that was really important. And then, the third thing is, once I started talking to these people, I would say that I wasn't doing it to make it all about me. It was from a genuine place of learning. And I think for me, that is one of my strengths. So there's a book called Strength Finders. And if you take the test, yeah, so if you take that test, you understand kind of your top 5 strengths. And for me, it's a learning standpoint. And so whenever I had these conversations, it was always from the idea about I wanted to learn. And I don't think that people felt put off by that type of approach. And they wanted to help in any way they could.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's like a really humble approach, I guess. I feel like that's a really thoughtful, like I feel like in general, it sounds like great. So curious about when you first started this business, what do you see as your past work experience that has a positive impact on your kind of like startup business? And what were something that you felt you wish you learned earlier when you started HealthAde Kombucha business?
Being in the workforce right after college for about 5 years, that's when I quit to start HealthAde. I would say one thing that I encountered was good and bad management. And so I really learned, I think, what it means to be a good leader of people and what I wanted to be as a leader because I saw those qualities in other people. I also saw what it meant to be a really poor leader. And so in that way, I think leadership examples I learned a lot from. And then the second thing is, it's really easy to get stuck in the details about something. And that's what happens when you're working on projects or working on, a presentation. But, moving the needle, that doesn't necessarily move the needle. So for me, I was like, why am I spending all this time, poking around at a stupid presentation? Am I even moving the needle with this type of work? And so for me, it's all about what type of activities do I want to be working on to move the needle for the business I'm working on.
Yeah, like I guess like identifying what is like the core issue instead of like focusing a lot on like smaller like details. It's like definitely a great learning. And then what would you say as make like a good boss? What do you think, makes like a bad boss, I guess?
Yeah, I would say a bad one is someone who's like a tyrant, like someone who's just saying, there's fear. They instill fear in people. The way that they speak is really harsh. It's my way or the highway. And so there's no collaboration. And so I would say maybe a dictator. But then I would say someone who's good is someone who can have a conversation with you and is able to pull out the right ideas from the person, not by telling them what it is, but by allowing them to get there themselves. And so I would say there's, instilling this level of engagement or empowerment into their team to come up with the work and the idea because it's theirs. And so I think if that's the case, the team is more willing to be able to accomplish what they need to because they came up with the plan. And so there's that. I would also say something about a good leader is someone who is not afraid to work hand in hand with their team, but also someone who's not afraid to make a decision. I think you need to be a decisive leader or be able to make a decision.
Yeah, totally. Those are some great points about leadership. In terms of like your past experience, when you first like started your company, what do you see as some skills that you wish you learned like ahead of times?
I wish I learned how to tell myself how to not motivate myself because I feel like I've done that often. But every person or most people, I believe, have this imposter syndrome in their head, unless they're just totally very confident who they are. But I wish I had ways, strategies to be able to talk myself out of my head when that voice came up. I also wish that I knew how to kind of bring in more financial talent into the company, because I feel like that would have really helped our company from the front end without struggling through over years, just trying to, find the best Band-Aid without really trying to find the best solution, which is bring some financial expertise into the company.
Absolutely. So I think you mentioned that you guys hired like a really great CFO like now, but curious about in terms of hiring, like a lot of the times you probably need to hire specialty like experts in some category. And how do you evaluate their skills beside maybe looking at their track record, like what kind of company they work at in the past or something like that?
Yeah, so I would say first and foremost is knowing what type of skills you need in the role. Someone who just has a great energy doesn't necessarily mean they'll be good for the role. And so first is really understanding what type of skills is needed for that role. Then is, it's not just a resume. I feel like a resume can really tell you only so much. And so really trying to draw out specific examples from that person in an interview, whether it be, if it's in, let's say, the sales world, do they know who the contacts are within all the main customers that you need to see? If it's more of like an analytical role, having them do an exercise or a case study to see if they can really draw out what you want them to draw out. If it's more about like an operations or manufacturing role, like do they have the level of years of expertise? How they manage a team? How have they been able to drive down margins? So talking through some specifics around what the job objectives are really important.
Yeah, totally. So in terms of what they're saying, is that just so when you're examining their ability, would you bring in maybe like experts in the area to like help you examine their skills? Like for example,
Yeah, so sometimes I would have external people interview some candidates. So I had the
mhm,
board members interview them, just to see if they are, you know, saying the same story.
mhm,
I would say also there's a level of like characters. So we have this tool called Culture Index that
mhm,
we have everyone take before they interview with our company or
mhm,
when they apply for a job. And
mhm,
that really helps to understand, you know, who you are. Like,
mhm,
are you a very detailed person? Are you,
mhm.
do you like to work in groups or do you not like to work in groups? So a lot of what the job entails will be matched up to this type of index to see if there's a match.
Mhm. Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Basically like a personality, I guess like not personality, but like personal trait quiz or something.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So, well, thank you so much, Vanessa. Like, I learned so much about how you started your company, and now, like, a lot of listeners are starting their own company. So now, like, we're gonna kind of like switching, like the subject into, you know, if you're creating a brand today, what would you do, right? So, um, so first of all, you know, we know how you came up with the HealthAde Kombucha, and now if let's pretend you and I are starting a coffee brand. So first of all, like the product, if you're starting a brand all over again, what kind of product would you pick, and then how would you make this product stand out?
So I would say that, you know, if it's coffee, right?
Hmm.
Um, I would say first, you know, understanding what are the consumers wanting. Do they
Hmm.
want a more strong coffee? Is there
Hmm.
something that's not serving their need today? So
Hmm.
I would say first and foremost is understanding from the consumer standpoint, what is a desire and what is like the demand and what's not being served with what's on the market today. So that's first.
Hmm.
And then second is, you know, from a product standpoint, I would spend the majority of the time trying to understand how to get to that ideal product after
Hmm.
determining where to go with what the consumer wants.
Hmm.
And so does that mean like a really, really earthy bean? Is that a really like dark bean? Is that a really more light decaf style?
Hmm.
And then I would say really working to perfect that product, but
Hmm.
also not allowing yourself to be the only one taste testing it. Like
Hmm.
then I would say, you know, give it to some friends, give it to, you know, random people, get some feedback on it. Because there's nothing better than feedback directly from consumers.
Hmm.
Because we had that at the farmers market is direct
Hmm.
feedback on the product.
Hmm.
So there's that.
Hmm.
And then once you have that feedback is, okay, let's test it out. So once you test it out, before testing it, I would say, you know, who are you going up against? Who is your Goliath? And so is it Pete's Coffee? Is it Starbucks? Is it,
Hmm.
you know, another brand on the market that's on the
Hmm.
grocery shelves today? And so I would understand, you know, from that point of view, who you're trying to go after, and then what's the best way to build your brand, knowing who your competitors are. So maybe there's a way to, because the consumer, let's just say the consumer wants a really dark bean. It's
Hmm.
really like a hard-hitting coffee.
Hmm.
And then once you've perfected that, you know, after all the design and everything, you're ready to put it out to market. Let's just say that consumer, we think that consumer probably is at all of the coffee roadshows. Let's
Hmm.
just say that that consumer is probably at all of the
Hmm.
coffee stores in LA that also roast their beans that have a certain type of grade of coffee. And so we want to put that product in those types of stores. We want our product to be present in all the coffee roadshows. We want our
Hmm.
coffee to be available where those consumers will see it, try it, pick it up.
Hmm.
And then I would say the best thing to do is understand, okay, from that level, what is the data telling me? What is the consumer saying from that point?
Yeah, I feel like this is such a great lesson. This is like basically a business school lesson, I feel like. Yeah, like I think those are great ways to work on like the product. And then what was like some initial feedback you got for kombucha, for like HealthAde Kombucha? I feel like you guys are such
So
a
in the
category king. So whenever I think about kombucha, I don't even think about, oh, what is the brand? I just take this bottle like all the time. So I
yeah.
feel like
Oh,
I've
that's
never,
awesome.
yeah, like I don't think I've drank like, I don't think I like whenever I think about this, I just think about like I just picture this like brown bottle. It's like so
Oh,
unique.
that's amazing.
I don't know. Yeah.
That's so
Um.
cool. Well, I would say that um, some initial feedback. I mean, people were like, "How do you say? What is it? Kombucha?" They didn't know how to say kombucha. To be honest, some people today don't know how to say kombucha. Um, now, today, kombucha is only in about 12% of the households in the U.S. So 8 years ago, it's even way less. So a lot of people didn't know how to say kombucha. They were scared when you started talking about all the science. They didn't understand it. They didn't really want to understand the SCOBY. And then a lot of people, when they tasted it, they either said, oh, it's too vinegary, but then they came around. So their initial face was, oh, I don't like it. But then after a couple more sips, they got used to it. So in that way, we had a lot of education in the beginning.
Yeah. So when like back in time, like you mentioned that there I assume there wasn't any, I guess, like category king. Was there a Goliath that you guys are going after, or was it just like you guys and maybe like some other brands?
I love that you're such a loyalist. Actually, there is a market leader. He's been his company's been out on the shelf for about 25 years now, and so he was the first mover within kombucha. But I would say that, for so long, there's no one that's been his competitor. And so when we thought about going to market, we wanted to make sure that we were a different type of product, not so much different type of product, but different proposition that their product offered. So with our bottle, it stands out with the brown glass. With our label and with our colors, it's more fun. It just is more polarizing than the other products that have been out before us. In a way that made you think of fun, premium, something that wasn't too sciencey or too hippie. And so we wanted to make sure that it was more relevant and actually had a more nostalgic feel that people wanted to pick up and try because they felt familiar with it.
Yeah, was it like, I think like I had one other one, so like I didn't even know that was kombucha. It was with chia seeds, some like that bottle. I don't know. I think it was an interesting drink. In terms of like pricing it or like kind of to differentiate yourself with the competitor, what would you suggest if you're like starting another brand? Like how would you price it?
Okay, so when we started HealthAde, we priced it because there's another brand on the market, like I mentioned, who's been out for 25 years. And so we wanted to make sure that we were premium in the market and we were a premium product, so we wanted to communicate that via price. And so that's why we, upon seeing them being $3.99, we said, okay, let's not be too far away from them, but let's just say we're $1 more. So we initially started ourselves at $4.99. Over time, we decreased our price, but that's how we decided on price in the beginning. It was very quick. I would say there was no analysis on it. There was no deep feeling on it. But, today I would try and understand as much as possible what, if it were coffee, let's just say, what are the other competitors out there? What does my product have in terms of value for the consumer that warrants any type of higher price, if any? If it doesn't, can we be competitive in the market alongside, price parity, so making sure we're the same price? But then something to look out for is, a race to the bottom, because a lot of people always are cutting price. And so that's an easy place to go. But once you start, it's a very slippery slope.
Yeah, totally. So in terms of like the making like your brand more premium, so I feel like when you're doing like a test to the market, like everyone will be like, oh yeah, like I want it to be cheaper, cheaper, cheaper. But how do you kind of like decided this is a position that you are gonna go? And then what, I know that you guys are like smaller batch like brewed. So compared to a lot of like other companies, so what make it like more advanced than the competitors?
Yeah. So, when you think about, so I would say not a lot of deep thought went into how we, thought about the price. So we went with our gut decision on a lot of things. Now, would I do that again? Maybe. I would say sometimes there's data analysis paralysis, so it's easy to get caught up in all the data. However, when we think about what differentiates us today, we use the highest quality ingredients when it comes to what we put into the bottle. We actually have probiotics in our bottle. A lot of other companies just simply don't have the level of probiotics that we do, or even have probiotics in their bottle. So, from a efficacy standpoint, the actual what's in the bottle is really potent and good for you. And so when we think about, how we're different, it's, our brand is different, the ingredients are different, the flavors are different. And so when you think, and then also just the flavor once you taste it is different. And so when you think about what consumers view us as differentiated from other competitors, I really think it comes down to those things.
Yeah, for sure. So we talk about like how you guys make the product itself. So in terms of creating like a successful brand, I know that like a lot of the CPG brands are really focusing on just like the packaging or the go-to-market strategy. Curious, how much emphasis do you focus on like the product itself? And then do you think the product actually like brand by brand are like super different? Or like, do you think people should spend more money and time on marketing and go-to-market?
I think the product is one of the most, if not the most important thing about your company. It has to be a winner when it comes to tasting good, offering some type of benefit if that's what it does. So it has to walk the walk and talk the talk. And so product itself has to be the most important thing. You can't market something to taste better. That's the problem.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like that's a really good one piece of great advice on like focusing on whatever you're doing in the core instead of just like go full on just like marketing and everything else. In terms of like differentiate the brands, like you mentioned about the packaging, and then I remember you guys did a campaign about, just like, like people who drink kombucha instead of like the people who are doing yoga or whatever, it's like probably everyone. So like when it comes to the go-to-market strategy, at what point did you kind of switch from the farmers market to Whole Foods or to like Kroger? How do you kind of go into all these like bigger brands?
Yeah, so the first year was 2012 where we started in farmers markets and we expanded to about 7 of them in LA. The year of 2013, we thought there has to be a better way because farmers markets are so hard to work in. There's a cap because there's only so many people that go to a farmers market. And so we wanted to expand our brand. So that was the year we went into wholesale stores and delivering to them in LA. But it's not the larger big box stores that you're talking about. It was really 2014 that we got our start into the grocery stores. Our first store was Gelson's. And then in that way, that's when we really started on this kind of growth within grocery. And at first, it wasn't going to like the Target or Kroger's. At first, we wanted to make sure that we were winning within the natural stores. So that's why Whole Foods is really important to us. Sprouts. So the natural channel was for us the 2014 to 2016. 2017 is when we started our growth into the conventional world. And that's when we really started to go into Target, Ralph's, Kroger, Albertsons, Safeway. So that's when we got our start into those stores. And now we're in over 30,000 doors. We're in, we have over 350 employees. And we're in all channels of trade at this point, even Costco. And we sell in Canada and Mexico.
Yeah. So in terms of going into these stores, I guess the consumer profile kind of switch from time to time. So at the beginning, I would say maybe let's say like the couple stages that you mentioned, the stage one is like the farmer's market. Like what was your definition on like the consumer profile? And then, what was the strategy on, getting from farmers market to the first actual like store? And then what, like, would love to also know about from that store, how do you get into like every other store? Like, what was the process like? Because as outsiders, we don't really know how it works. Like, how do you even get into the store?
Yeah. So the farmers market consumer is very much, the
Mhm.
early adopter female who was, into health. So
Mhm.
they're health minded. They're
Mhm.
probably active. They probably do yoga or Pilates. And so for the beginning of our time, the consumer
Mhm.
was that type of person. As we've grown into these different accounts, the consumer has shifted to, we're really going for the more mainstream consumer now. We have our
Mhm.
core demographic,
Mhm.
but, Kroger and Safeway, who shops there is everyone. And
Mhm.
so, how do we make kombucha appealing to the masses? And that's really kind of where we're going with it. In terms of getting into the store, so, in the individual stores, we hired a team, and,
Mhm.
how we go there, you just go into the store, you have some samples, you have some
Mhm.
assets or collateral
Mhm.
that talks about your brand. You have to be
Mhm.
able to talk about your brand. And so
Mhm.
that's really kind of step one. But,
Mhm.
to go into these larger grocery stores, for Gelson's, for example, we got a call to go meet with their buyer because they had discovered our product at the farmers market, at some of these local
Mhm.
gourmet shops, and they were interested. So we got the call to go into them.
Mhm.
How we were able to outreach to other stores is, one, just trying to cold call them to
Mhm.
understand who is the category manager within the
Mhm.
set of where you're trying to put your product. So who's the category manager for kombucha? Then is, we utilize brokers. They already have these contacts already.
Mhm.
So in order to use them to get in front of them for a meeting, then
Mhm.
you're able to talk to them about why your brand is important to bring in.
Yeah. What would you say as like the factors that like they want your brands to be in? What would that be, like the how many sales that you will be generating, or like do they look at your past sales number? Do they look at your customer profile, or like what would you say was like the things that they care about?
Yeah, so I would say how we looked at it before versus now is very different.
Mhm.
In the beginning, for us, we didn't have any numbers. We had no data.
Mhm.
We didn't buy any data, so we had nothing. But we had a
Mhm.
feeling that we were doing really well. We knew what our sales orders were week to week. We knew what we sold in the farmers market. So it was more about selling what the brand was, selling what the category was doing. We didn't
Mhm.
have hard numbers, but we knew that we could give us a shot and we'll do our best and we'll really succeed because we are winners in that way. And
Mhm.
so in the beginning, I feel like that's what we sold. Now it's very much, what is the size of the category? How productive are we? What are our past sales numbers? What is the future of marketing looking like so that we can support future growth? And so now it's very different. The presentations, I would say before, were very much aesthetic and brand based. Now it's very much a blend of brand marketing and excuse
Bless
me.
you.
It was a blend of marketing,
Mhm.
creative, and also the data on how productive we are.
Yeah. So in terms of going into these stores, how does like the financial set of things works? Like, do you have to kind of like sell it to them and then they sell into a customer, or do you kind of like provide your product into their warehouse and then whatever they sell, they will kind of pay you that way? How does the just like the financing works?
Yeah, so different accounts, different stores have different models,
Hmm.
but typically you sell your product to a distributor, and that
Hmm.
distributor sells your product to the store. And
Hmm.
so there's essentially 2 points that you have to think of in this whole supply chain.
Hmm.
And each of those points, each of those groups have their own margin.
Hmm.
So you have to kind of think through how that will affect your pricing to the end consumer.
Hmm. I know that you guys have like online, so I mean, it's like how much share are sold online, and then how much are like our people buying in store. We don't have to know the exact number. I don't want to, go too much into something that you don't feel comfortable about talking about. Like, so just curious, like in the, I guess like in the general picture, would you say people buy more online or in actual stores?
Well, because kombucha is refrigerated and
Mm-hmm.
it's been heavy to ship and it's
Mm-hmm.
cold, so it's very expensive. And
Mm-hmm.
so up until COVID, our e-com sales were probably like less than 1% of our
Mm-hmm.
business.
Mm-hmm.
But, post-COVID or during COVID, I guess we're still in COVID, it has been e-com has been really strong for us. So it's,
Mm-hmm.
even though small today, it's very strong, especially for the future, with the purchasing patterns of what our consumers doing.
Absolutely. So in terms of like online, at what point did you kind of started shifting? Like I wouldn't say shifting, but like starting selling online.
Well, we actually started selling online in 2014 because people wanted it in New York, for example,
Mm-hmm.
but we couldn't get it to them, and so we charged them the cost of the product plus
Mm-hmm.
the cost of shipping. And at that time, it cost about $120 for us to ship one case. So sometimes people
Wow.
were paying $160 because they really wanted Health-Ade, which is crazy. Now it's, we've gotten shipping down way less.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like I always bought it from like Whole Foods. That's been my go-to. Then I didn't know how like you guys can actually do online until like maybe recently I started searching this. But yeah, like Whole Foods always has it. And then like I feel like it's just such a yeah, it's super convenient and great. So in terms of the growth, what were some original like go-to-market strategies? So if you're again going back to starting like a coffee brand or whatever.
Yeah, so I would say, no, obviously COVID times is different. I would say one really important way that we grew was through field marketing. So being present at events to sample the product, being
Mm-hmm.
present so that consumers can see that what your product
Mm-hmm.
is. So that was a big piece of it. Another piece is PR and
Mm-hmm.
influencers. So, in the beginning, we didn't use any influencers. It was just a natural evolution because people just in a grassroots, authentic way loved our brand.
Mm-hmm.
So gradually, influencers came to our brand because they loved our brand.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really important to help kind of spread the word to their following. And from a actual distribution standpoint, I think an important thing is to think about where your brand will be visible in terms of associations, and then also what are growth drivers. So for us, we had a bottoms-up method where, the one in up and down the street accounts in LA, what are the brand accounts that we really wanted to be in because our consumer went in frequently. And then from the top down with some of these larger grocery stores that you had to be in order to get distribution and availability, like, for example, Whole Foods, Target. Like, you just need to be available in them in order for more people to buy them. But then there's also the brand aspect on how to really build a brand locally.
Yeah, in terms of like the product itself, do you think it kind of like shift during times, or was it the recipe like exactly the same from day one?
We tweaked it a bit, really to make it more consistent and really taking in consumer feedback. And so, for example, from a flavor standpoint, we have more flavors now because some consumers really wanted to see other flavors within our portfolio. And then from a just overall how the product does taste to people, we haven't changed ultimately the main way that we do it, but we've done it in a way that, if something was too bubbly, we, understood how to adjust that. That was our number one real complaint was it was either too bubbly or too flat. So there's inconsistent bubbles within each bottle.
So like how do you gather the feedback? Would it be from like just like a lot of customer survey, or like would it be like from the trade shows that you and your co-founder go to, or like how do you pick this is like the feedback that I'm like taking or?
So there's ways that you can do it through consumer research agencies. We didn't do that in the beginning, but we're starting to do that now. There's also just feedback that you hear from the buyers, like from the store customers that you have, from the consumers at some of these field marketing events. So, if you start to hear something, hearing something once may not mean that you need to take action on it, So if you start hearing a theme from your consumers, you should definitely listen to that.
Yeah. You mentioned like there are a lot of, I guess, like celebrity or influencers like were early adopter of your brand. Who was like some of the most effective, I guess, influencer for the brand?
So we've had so many. I mean, so many celebrities have been pictured with HealthAde, from Kim Kardashian, Kourtney Kardashian,
Mhm.
Kendall. So that definitely got a lot of impressions.
Mhm.
I would say that not so much one person, but probably the type of people. So like these health bloggers
Mhm.
really started to make a name for HealthAde in the beginning,
Mhm.
because they were just very well reputable and very well
Mhm.
regarded. That
Mhm.
there was credibility in what they're saying.
Would you say they're more like tailored towards like one group, like the health conscious like female, or would you say they're like generally just like huge bloggers? That why I ask this because of like I'm just curious, in terms of marketing, would it be more effective to target like one specific smaller like a smaller deep niche group, or like should you target like the mass like the biggest following account on Instagram?
There is a very strong return on utilizing micro influencers.
Hmm.
So, like, a lot of people use these big influencers, but we utilize a lot of micro influencers, and they can really help from a regional level. They have really targeted audiences. So,
Hmm.
I don't think that they are the wrong method. It just depends on kind of what you may want to do for your brand. So, there's definitely a place for the micro influencers versus the big influencers.
Yeah. At what point did you started like doing actual marketing than just like people picking it up from wherever they see it?
Yeah, so we spent marketing dollars pretty early on, but the early marketing dollars was more about like PR.
Hmm.
I would say it's important, like let's say you go into a geography, let's say a new geography, let's just say,
Hmm.
I don't know, San Francisco. If
Hmm.
we were to launch in San Francisco, we can't launch marketing dollars too early because we need the product to be available first.
Hmm.
So usually we would launch marketing dollars in the way of field marketing, digital advertising,
Hmm.
um, micro influencers, probably about 2 to 3 months after we have large distribution gains.
Got it.
Then there's also trade marketing, so like
Mhm.
in-store marketing. We would do that pretty early on, though.
Yeah, that's super interesting. You mentioned a great point on expanding the geographic like map of like your company or products. Like curious, when did you guys like started going out of LA?
So out of LA was really in 2014.
Mhm.
That's when we started going out of LA. So that's when we started in New York. That's when we started in San Francisco, and then also like the Rocky Mountain area.
Yeah. So was your product like intentionally targeting the more like major city audience, or like do you think it was more like, Oregon, Utah, or like just curious?
Yeah, it definitely was more of the urban centers that we targeted. That's where the density of people are, more, kombucha drinkers index there. So we definitely targeted more city centers.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. This is super helpful. I know we're about to hit the time, so we're at the last kind of like little fire chat with you. My first question is like, what's your favorite book?
Oh, my favorite book is actually a book called The Wild Swan. It's
Mhm.
nonfiction about generations of females who are Chinese American and kind of going through, war times, modern times, and kind of raising their children.
Wow, that's such an interesting book. And who made the biggest impact in your career?
Mm, on my career, I would say probably my parents in a way.
Mhm.
Probably my mom. I mean, I would say that in my dad, I really saw someone who took a traditional path, engineering, business school, and went to start his own thing. And so I very much modeled a little bit of what he's done. But I would say
Mhm.
my mom has always been, even though she shows it in different ways, has always been a supporter in what I do in life.
Yeah, that's super cool. So like so where can we find you if you're not at work?
Mm. So I'm probably at home with my newborn baby, who's almost 5 months old. And so I'm probably at a park or at home with my baby, or trying to buy, trying to find a way to do my hair.
I mean, what do you do with your hair?
Well, right now I haven't done much, but either blow drying it or different colors or different styles, and so that's what I enjoy.
Yeah, that sounds so interesting. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
I would invite my mom, as she's passed now, so I would invite the ghost of my mom. I would invite Oprah. I wouldn't invite all of them, but I would invite some of the Spice Girls just to hear how they've, had their lives over the years. I would also invite a couple of female entrepreneurs that I admire, like Jen Atkins, the founder of Spanx. And I also think I would invite, I don't want to make this political at all, but I just find him interesting as a human. Both Donald Trump and Barack Obama, I would invite them to both to my dinner table.
Wow, that sounds like a really interesting party. And yeah, is there any particular brand or company that in your space or around space that you care about, that you find really interesting?
Let's see. Spaces I care about, I would say, is sustainable energy. I think that's a great category, but in our category, companies that I find interesting, I would say more of there's one company called Fly by Jing I love. The founder, Jing, she is a renowned tastemaker herself. She's an expert chef in terms of coming up with products, and so she's come up with a condiment company that's focused on Chinese sauces. So I love her product in of itself, and so I love that one. I also love I can't get enough of them. They're called Bougie Base, so they're brand new, but they're gluten-free, sugar-free, organic, so it's good for you sweets.
Wow, that's so yeah, I love you're mentioning other food brands. I'd love to check them out. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the show, Vanessa.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good one.
Really appreciate it.
Okay, good luck. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.